This video is sponsored by Raycon, more on them later. Hey, do you want to know what the least funny thing you can do is? Explaining why something is funny, because, you know, comedy and humor has this spontaneous quality to it, and I don't really want to slow that down to talk about how funny games are, but maybe I can do it some justice? There aren't too many games out there that are completely devoid of humor of any kind, but as a form of entertainment, video games generally like to angle themselves towards making you laugh. I want to focus on games that are deliberately setting out with this goal in mind. I know there are plenty of glitchy, unfinished monsters out there that are goddamn hilarious to witness in all their buggy motion, but considering we're looking at the funniest games of all time here, we need to raise the bar a tad. I want games that are intentionally funny and masters at doing so. Which works very appropriately with Raycon's earbuds because the sponsors of this video are intentionally masters at piping music into my ooey gooey grey matter. I've been using Raycon for at least 3 years at this point, and their premium brand of high quality wireless earbuds are in my ears basically every time I leave the house or do some cleaning around the house. I personally like how I can put them in my ear and not have any dangly stems to worry about, and with 32 hours of battery life you'll never be caught without your music. This holiday season, Raycon are upping their game again, and even though they start at half the price of other premium audio brands, you can get 30% off by shopping for Raycon's holiday bundles, like the All-Star bundle for the gym nut in your life. Their wireless earbuds, headphones and speakers offer premium sound, useful features, an almost custom comfortable fit, and up to 54 hours of battery life. If this all sounds good and you fancy getting your ears on Raycon's everyday earbuds, there's a way to do so which also supports my channel. You can go to buyraycon.com/rabbit or click the link in the description to get 20% off site-wide. That's buyraycon.com/rabbit to get 20% off anywhere on the site. Thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Anyway, it's time to do the funny. So as if to illustrate how basically impossible it is to make this video, I want you to know that narrowing the selection down to merely 5 video games was a hell of a challenge. I drew up a shortlist and I originally had Octodad on here with its unique blend of a surreal premise and jiggly ragdoll physics that work with deliberately imprecise controls to make it a laugh riot from start to finish, but the more I was comparing it to my eventual number 5, the more I was leaning towards Untitled Goose Game instead. They're completely different games with vastly contrasting premises, but you can make comparisons with how these games present a level for you to play around in and solve the puzzle that's stopping your forward progression. And they both star socially inept animals that cause havoc in an otherwise peaceful society. I can stretch this further if you really want me to. Untitled Goose Game is the kind of special blend that doesn't come around anywhere near as often as it should do. There's loads of quirky indie games out there that put you in scenarios that you could never imagine, but at no point when growing up with video games did I ever anticipate a future that would allow me to roam around a sleepy village as an antisocial, borderline sociopathic goose. I mean, it sells itself, doesn't it? Definitely the first trailer that any of us saw was very convincing for what kind of game this was and the sheer amount of chaotic energy that it radiates. It never gets more complicated than just being an asshole goose who steals things and at worst is merely shooed away by the poor fuckers who live here. The premise does most of the heavy lifting, but at the end of the day, Untitled Goose Game is a puzzle game, and deciphering the few clues you are given to solve the problems in the game, problem being an interesting word to use and is more related to forward progression and how badly you can dunk on this poor child and steal his glasses, solving the puzzles with ingenious goose brain power is satisfying and only accentuates the funny stuff. Why would you run around as a human in GTA wrecking the place when you could be a goose doing the exact same thing? I ain't no chicken. I'm a simple man, I see satire and parody done well and in good taste, and I can feel the endorphins rush to my brain shortly after, and let's face it, there's absolutely no shortage of satirical games out there from basically every era of gaming. I guess it depends on what you're in the market for, really. Something like The Stanley Parable takes aim at narrators and player choice, while Grand Theft Auto takes the piss out of modern society in general. My preference has always been for something a bit more substantial though, and even though Conkers Bad Fur Day is riffing on something that was only about 5 years old by the time it came out in 2001, that just makes it all the more relevant. And even strangely relevant nowadays, since 3D platformers have had a mini revival of sorts, and all the shots it takes at that particular genre still land more than 20 years later. There's just something so incredibly contagious about a 3D platformer starring some lovable mascot that knows exactly what kind of game it is. Along with Nintendo, Rare were one of the primary sources of bomb-ass 3D platformers in the late 90s, and so you can count on them to understand exactly how to make one of these games, and especially how to make a game that looks like Banjo-Kazooie, and even has a similar focus on humor, but under the surface, it is so much more vulgar. The story goes that Rare showed Conkers Bad Fur Day off at E3 1998 to a very lukewarm reception, since at that time it wasn't aimed at a mature audience and was just a rehash of the E for everyone that Banjo was already doing. Working in more mature themes and certain moments and jokes that I can't show in this video without also creating an OnlyFans was a genius move, and when combined with these colourful visuals and this genre's history of being so accessible to all ages, it's so wonderfully jarring that I can't help but love it. Ironically, Conkers Bad Fur Day has a lot of game design problems, and sometimes it can feel like the majority of the dev team were put to task to make the game funny instead of, you know, fun, but it only helps the humour to stand out even further. Nothing will make you laugh harder than struggling with a tricky section for ages, eventually squeezing your way through, and then your reward being a funny cutscene. Maybe just make more of a game to go with all the funny stuff though? I don't have all the patience in the world. I don't know if I have a favourite type of comedy, but surreal humour is pretty close to top tier if you ask me. Not to explain the joke more than I'm already doing by making this video in the first place, but if you think that comedy is all about a setup and a payoff, with the occasional subversion thrown in there too, surreal comedy is all about that subverting lifestyle and doesn't waste any time explaining itself. There are plenty of surreal video games out there that angle themselves towards being fun rather than just being weird, and for my money, you will struggle to find a game that embraces this more from the outset than Jazzpunk. I almost feel bad talking about the comedy in this game, since it should probably come with a spoiler warning, since even though Jazzpunk was clearly designed with a sense of humour, you usually can't see the jokes coming. So as long as we all know that I'm ruining everyone's day over here. On the face of it, Jazzpunk is a little hard to pin down genre-wise. The punk part alludes to a desire to explore this alternate history world called Japanada, and all the colourful characters who live in it, but as soon as you do even the briefest bit of exploration, the tone of Jazzpunk shows itself for all to see. I'm going to refrain from too many specific examples because, again, it's the sort of game where you should experience as much of it for yourself as you can, but what worked so well for me was the frequency of jokes, and yet, almost paradoxically, the fact that I could rarely see them coming. When everything is this bizarre and surreal, you never relax into any kind of comfort that helps you to understand the rhythm and consistency with which the jokes are being told. At the same time, it never feels overwhelming either, and all the comedy is merely a part of Jazzpunk's world and its way of telling a story of these wacky characters. Comparing it to Conker, which definitely relied more on references and shock humour, Jazzpunk feels more comfortable with how bizarre it gets, and it helps it make the whole experience intensely memorable and also very, very funny. I need more games like this in my life. Coming off the infectious, chaotic energy of Jazzpunk, I think we need to slow things down a tad. I want to tap into the idea that games from every era have the capacity to be funny, since as soon as developers worked out that video games had to entertain the masses, they started to work in more of a personality to their creations. You might think that technical limitations would prevent a game from being funny, but to that I want to point out that The Secret of Monkey Island came out in 1990 as a point-and-click adventure with primitive graphics, but with such a talented team of writers behind it, this game was able to transcend its basic premise and become, I'm gonna say easily, one of the funniest games ever made. You know, it's an engaging adventure game where you explore islands and try not to be killed by pirates, but it could so easily have been a humorless experience. And yet with genius comedic minds like Dave Grossman, who would go on to help make the Sam & Max games and Strong Bad, and also some guy called Tim Schafer, who I think has done some pretty decent work after this as well, you've got a team here who can give The Secret of Monkey Island a ton more charm than it would otherwise have. It's actually really impressive how well this game is aged, since on the face of it, point-and-click adventures aren't as popular as they once were, and you'd imagine that the average player nowadays would struggle to be engaged, but the comedic tone of The Secret of Monkey Island permeates every tiny fibre of this game from beginning to end. It never takes itself too seriously and is home to scene after scene of some uber-talented writers flexing their comedic muscles. It gets fairly absurd fairly quickly, but with more of a concrete structure than Jazzpunk, and against the typical swashbuckling adventure backdrop, it almost works like a parody adventure game full of hilarious dialogue options. For a game that came out 32 years ago, that's some crazy foresight. I suppose a good joke never gets old, you know? Some developers just have a knack for comedy. Whether that's because the games are being designed from the ground up to be funny, or simply because they've got some talented as fuck writers, the patterns speak for themselves. Valve don't really make games anymore because Steam generates more money in a year than I could ever count in my lifetime, but back in the day, when the world was black and white and dinosaurs roamed the earth, Valve were directly responsible for some hilarious video games. Not all of them, mind you. Half-Life is played pretty straight and Left 4 Dead is reduced to a handful of character interactions, but at their best, Valve are absolute masters of their craft. I nearly picked Team Fortress 2 for a multitude of reasons, and if my sense of humour wasn't so dry, I'd probably go for it, but I'm sorry. Portal is some of the funniest video game I have ever experienced. There's only one speaking role, but GLaDOS carries the comedy so hard that you don't really need anyone else. The craziest thing is that for ages the internet was obsessed with one line in this game and regurgitated it out of existence, but basically every spoken word of dialogue in Portal is so well crafted to make everything just that tad bit more funny. And then they made a sequel. Portal 2 is the funniest game I've played, and it's not even all that close. If you want to see what you can improve on with a sequel, even on a first game as solid as the original Portal, everything that Portal 2 does is larger in scope, and this of course extends to the humour, which is doing so much work that I can't even begin to imagine the effort that went into it. GLaDOS is back being wonderful as usual, but you would be shocked just how much you can improve a game by adding another comedic character to the mix, and Wheatley is the headline stealer here. His style of comedy is a lot more bumbling British, which, hey, that's like 90% of the funny people over here, but when combined in a game with that dry, sarcastic, almost cynical humour of GLaDOS, it's a wonderful sight to behold. Portal 2 is a comedy sketch, poorly masquerading as a physics-based puzzle game, and just as you're getting used to one scenario like Wheatley being your awkward sidekick, GLaDOS is rebooted and you've got her to worry about, and then Wheatley betrays you, and then GLaDOS is a friendly potato, and it's this upping of the ante that shifts character dynamics and keeps the humour fresh. It's endlessly quotable and one of the most entertaining games you can ever experience. Robots make the best comedians, apparently. And that was my list of the funniest games ever made. Do you agree, or is there another game you think is funnier? Let me know in a comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe for more in the future, and hit that bell for notifications of new videos. If you need another video to watch right now, I ranked every God of War game last week, and I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon like the Green Scorpion, Rainer Bainer Bobana, and Scott Riker. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.